What's up YouTube, welcome to Tropical TCG, and today I have my Dragonic Vanquisher Deck Profile. So as our starting Vanguard we have Spark Kid Dragoon. Its ability is Counterblast 1, put him into the soul, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose a grade 3 among them, and add it to your hand. Now sometimes he doesn't go off, but you do need that extra consistency when looking for Dragonic Vanquisher, just because so many cards rely on it to be as your Vanguard. So just having that um, a little bit extra consistency in searching for him does make a difference. And also, if you already have him, it also gives you stride fodder if you don't already draw into one. So I do prefer him over any of the other Narukami starting vanguards for this particular deck. For the trigger lineup, I run 4 heal standard, 4 draw not so standard, and I'll get to that in a little bit, and then 8 crit. 4 of them being the put into the soul, give +3 to a unit, and of course 4 of the new ones which support Vanquishers, where you pretty much put into the soul and draw a card when your Vanquisher Vanguard attacks, and also give it +5. So the reason I run draw triggers over 12 crit is because sometimes you don't always draw into your card that you need, and it does make a difference whether or not you do draw into your Dragonic Vanquisher, so I just wanted a little bit more consistency in searching for him. You guys can run the 12 crit and for heal, but my personal preference is running the 4 draws. Next, for the grade 1s, we have of course the 4G perfect guards, because you do counterblast a lot in the deck, and being able to countercharge really does help you when you're pushing for a late game, so you do need to run the G perfect. I think you can get away with running the regulars, but I prefer the Gs. And then we run 4 of this guy, Chain Bolt Dragoon. Its ability is, once per turn, GB1. When your opponent's rearguard is put to the drop zone by one of your card effects, and you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Vanquisher in its card name, your opponent chooses one of his or her rearguards in the drop zone and binds it. You also give plus 2000 power to another unit. So that's really strong, especially since you want the binding to happen early game, so late game you have all of the key pieces you need to just end it with your Last Stride Vanquisher card. But just being able to give +2 to something does add a little bit more pressure, and just binding cards from the drop zone hurts those Legion players. So I must have for running it at 4. Then I have the 4 Striders, helps you search for Vanquisher, pretty standard. And then of course I run 2 of this card. It's a Thunderstrike ability, which means your opponent needs to have 2 or more bind cards for her effects to actually go off. But her effect is Soul Blast 1. When this unit boosts, it gets +3, and if the card that this unit boosted hits the Vanguard, you Counterblast 1, and your opponent chooses a Rearguard and binds it. So again, helps with that bind mechanic for that last stride. For the grade 2s, I run 4 of the new ones. Rock Climb Dragoon. Ability is GB1, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1. When this is placed on the rear guard, if you have Vanquisher as your Vanguard, your opponent chooses a card and binds it. Or chooses a rear guard and binds it, and this gets +2. So again, there's a whole lot of cards that helps with the bind mechanic, and it does become relevant to bind as much cards as you possibly can. So I do run 4 of him. With that being said, I run 4 Voltage Horn Dragons. Now you don't need to run 4. I personally run 4 just to add a little bit more consistency in seeing him. Its ability is GB1, Counterblast 1. When this is just boosted, your opponent chooses one of his or her rearguards and retires it. So again, helps with the bind mechanic. Retire binds it. So it helps with the bind mechanic. For pretty much just counterblasting one and having something giving it more power. So I run it at 4, but you don't really need to. And then the last grade 2 we run is Chatara. Now, it's kind of a downfall that he can't attack rearguards, but it makes up for it with his actual ability. When he's on the rearguard circle, he gets +3, and if it hits the Vanguard, you counterblast 1, draw a card, and your opponent chooses a card in his or her drop zone, and binds it. So again, helps with the bind mechanic, gives you a little bit more draw power, and an 11k boost, or 11k column, just by having it on the rearguard, is worth having. So I do run 3 of him. For the grade 3s, I run 2 of the regular Vermilion and of course 2 of the Crimson. I do run the Legion in the deck just as a secondary plan. I don't really go into Legion all that much when I'm playing the deck. But sometimes you just use all of your triggers and you want them back in, or you just don't see your Vanquisher, because that can happen sometimes. And having a Legion is a lot better than just sitting on an 11k that doesn't really do anything other than drive check twice, hoping you're going to get that Vanquisher card. So I do run the Legion as a secondary tactic, but that's just my personal preference. You can run any other grade 3s that you want for the deck, but I chose to run Legion. And of course, the main card of the deck is Dragonic Vanquisher. His ability on the Vanguard Circle is when your opponent's rear guard is placed in a drop zone by one of your card effects, give it +3 and a crit. You won't really use that unless both you and your opponent kind of exhausted all of your resources, and you're just kind of old school fighting with a grade 3. But you really use him for his name, obviously, and the ability when when a card is stride on top of him, you counterblast one and you bind one of your opponent's rear guards. So that's really strong, and again helps with the bind mechanic. So of course you went through of him. It's a Dragonic Vanquisher Deck Profile. For the strides, I took a little. This is just my personal preference, and it's kind of weird, but I do run Blizza as my first stride. I know it's kind of weird, but I feel like it's just early pressure on your opponent, because most of the time your first stride, your opponent would probably guard with a couple triggers and just be done with that. Blizzard just makes it a little bit more hard on your opponent, where they just won't guard it, and hopefully you'll get lucky with your crits. But I do like having one Blizzard and just one random card, because every other card in your stride deck is a persona flip, so this is just a fodder for Blizzard when I actually first stride him. You can run the Narukami rare, which pretty much says with this hits bind the card, but again I like Blizzard for early pressure. For the rest of the stride zone, we have 4 of the Conquest Dragon. Its ability is flip one of himself up, and if you have 2 or more face-up cards in the G zone, you can retire a unit in the front row, and your front row gets +5 for each open rear guard in your opponent's front row. So again, adds a lot of pressure, and especially if you stride on top of him, that's an instant bind one in the front row. Use its effect to retire the front row and your opponent's side of the field, and so pretty much your front row will get +10. So it's a really strong card, second stride, and even third stride, or even last stride if you do end up just making him. So I do run 4 of him. Then finishing off the entire deck, we run 2 of the new Vanquisher card. A lot of people don't run this card for some reason, but I do like it as an endgame card. Its ability is turn one of himself face up, and it gets this effect where if this hits, your opponent chooses a rear guard, retires it, and then you choose 2 cards in your opponent's drop zone and bind them. So a lot of people don't like this card just because it's if it hits card, but I'm more concerned with its GB3 ability, which is your entire front row gets +3 for each card in your opponent's bind zone. So all those cards that you've binded with your Vanquisher Vanguard, or Chatera, Voltage Horn, your Rock Climb Dragoon, and all those other cards that just focuses around the bind mechanic, you're just making him even more powerful the later on you actually stride him. So that's why I say he's a late game card and pretty much the game finisher if this card doesn't actually finish the job. Most of the times if you are playing the deck correctly, you'll end with this guy, but sometimes your opponent will get lucky with heal triggers, or you'll get unlucky with triggers. So he is definitely a good last stride card and kind of your last hope. If you don't win with this, it's going to be grade 3 attacking for the rest of the game. So do run 2 of him. And that will finish off our Dragonic Vanquisher deck profile. If you guys like the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys want to see more Vanguard videos. And until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.